Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today's DoD Environmental Planning and Conservation Webinar Series presentation. As a reminder, today's presentation will be recorded and then posted on the Natural Resources DENX website under Resources. Today's presenter is Max Tarjan, a Science Project Manager and Data Quality Coordinator at NatureServe. She will be discussing species habitat models to guide stewardship of DoD mission priority species. Following the presentation, we will have time for questions. Before we get started, please take a moment to make sure your phones or web browsers are on mute. And with that, I will turn it over to Max.
Thanks so much for joining, everyone. I'm Max Tarjan. I also wanted to give a quick opportunity for my coworkers to introduce themselves who are also joining in part of this project. Gio, do you want to just say hello?
Hi, everybody. I'm Gio Rapacciuolo, Director of Applied Data Science at NatureServe, and have been involved in this project nearly from the beginning. Really excited to be talking, for Max to talk with you about it today. Yeah, it's great to have you. Please don't hesitate to ask any questions now or following this presentation.
Thanks, Gio. And Radhika, if you're here, do you want to say hello quickly?
Yeah, thanks, Max. Hi, everyone. I'm Radhika Chaudhary. I am ecological modeler at NatureServe. So I've been working on many of the species habitat models along with Max and Gio. Thanks.
Thanks, Radhika. So Gio and Radhika, I'm super glad they can join us, and they might be jumping in to ask some of your technical questions as we move through here. So as mentioned, I'm a science project manager at NatureServe. I manage a number of applied data science projects that are, some of the focus is to create species habitat models to get a better understanding of species habitat and to bring it to land managers such that it can inform their work. So I am at NatureServe. NatureServe oversees a network of natural heritage programs. These programs were brought together as a result of the Endangered Species Act coming into play. And here you see a map of them all coming online over time. So the heritage programs work together to collect information about species and ecosystems in a standardized way, and NatureServe facilitates that and facilitates the data standards and management of that information. So NatureServe and the network works to answer these questions. What is it? So a lot of questions about taxonomy, which species or ecosystems we're looking at. Where is it? Doing a lot of distribution work. How is it doing in terms of conservation status? We have a standardized way of assigning conservation ranks at both the local and global levels. What can we do about it, and how is it changing? This is a look at our distribution data set from the 2020s. So the network throughout the US, and also there's NatureServe Canada as well, throughout the Canadian provinces, collects information about where species occur and the how those populations are doing. So bringing in this idea of species habitat modeling, something my team works on is to leverage this occurrence information to help inform land management. So some examples of distribution information that was available previously are on the left. You can see for this G2 imperiled species, some points showing occurrence records. There's also some DoD occurrence records here that were contributed at the beginning of this project. And then the map on the right shows the previous understanding of the distribution of this species based on the IUCN range map. This map is very coarse in scale, so it's at the county level. So there are benefits to using both of these approaches. However, there are also a lot of gaps between the occurrence records where we're not sure if the species occurs or not, or what the habitat is like. And obviously including just county level information might be too coarse for a lot of land management actions. So what my team works to do is to take this very extensive data set of species occurrence data, both from NatureServe and from external sources, such as from partners like DoD, to combine that with information about the environment. So NatureServe has compiled a very large data set of over 100 predictors that characterize the environment. And to use that information, the occurrence records and the environmental information within machine learning and the Microsoft Azure environment to create a habitat model for a species. So what you're seeing in the map on the right is species distribution estimates, and it's showing the suitability or habitat probability for this species. So what the algorithms basically do is they take the locations where the species has been observed and identify areas of habitat that are similar and are likely to also be suitable for that species. So you have in red the high habitat probability areas where you're likely to have habitat that's very similar to where you've already observed the species. And then there's the medium habitat category in orange, where you're also likely, but the environment is a little bit different from where you've already observed the species, and then moving down to low probability, where you may find the species, but the habitat's a bit more different. So these environmental predictors largely came from NASA data and data that's within CONUS, so the lower 48 states, and involves a large suite of different terrestrial and aquatic habitat predictors. So in addition to the data that we use, we also have a modeling process that involves multiple stakeholders. So NatureServe goes through a process of iteratively building models and having model review occur. So when we're building models with a partner, for example, DoD in this case, there's partner engagement where people who are on the ground and familiar with the species are able to give feedback on the draft model outputs on that mapped distribution of suitable habitat. And we also use our experts within the Natural Heritage Program to give us that feedback as well. So there's an iterative process of model building and model review, which then ends in delivery and applying models to different applications to help with management on the ground. So as an example, we might start with a species that's been identified that maybe has some kind of range map available, but it's very coarse in scale. We will interact with potential model reviewers and have them sign up. So we have a number of online tools that really facilitates this process and bringing it to scale. So we're able to model many species and engage a lot of experts in the process. This is just an example of our sign up form. So when people are interested in reviewing a model for a specific species, they can come into the sign up form, indicate their affiliation, and then filter by project or by state and indicate what kind of species they might be interested in reviewing. Many of our projects involve a process of reviewing model inputs first. So once the occurrence information is collected, and also we have an idea of what environmental predictors might be important, we'll load that up into our model inputs review tool. So experts can come into this tool, review all of the input occurrence data that we're planning to use, and give feedback on whether they think that is accurate or whether there's more information that could be used and would be helpful in areas where there are gaps in our knowledge. They also, on the right here, I'll show you an animation of experts can actually inform the modeling process before we even have a draft model by indicating, based on their expert knowledge, which environmental predictors are likely to be important for habitat for that species. And this is just a widget where you can drag and drop those environmental predictors and then reorder them based on your expert knowledge of importance. So as I've described, what my team does is they take these species occurrence data as well as the environmental predictors, use machine learning to create a model which then can be used to make a mapped output where we're able to look at the predicted habitat probability in space. So in this case, you're seeing predicted habitat probability, again, red being high habitat probability, orange is medium, and the yellow is the low predicted habitat probability. So once we have a draft model for a species, we go through another round of review for that draft model. And what we do is we engage species experts in a model review through our model outputs review tool. So what you can see here in this example is the black polygon is actually an element occurrence from NatureServe. That's one of the ways that we show species occurrence. And then the dots are some additional data that we received from a partner from Fish and Wildlife Service, so more occurrence records. And then overlaid with that, you can see the habitat, the model's prediction of what might be high probability habitat. So a reviewer is able to look at this and then actually adjust the thresholds for probability so that they can make those areas of suitable habitat match their understanding of on the ground what's going on. And you're able to zoom in and adjust all three of those thresholds, which basically changes the area across which you're predicting high, medium, or low probability habitat. The other aspect that reviewers can comment on are the environmental predictors that the model showed as being most important for predicting habitat for this species. So this graphic on the right that has the red to blue scale shows the most important predictors for this model. In this case, precipitation of the driest quarter was the most important predictor, and then they're just ordered in descending importance. So reviewers can go in and look at those predictors and let the modelers know if those make biological sense based on their knowledge of the species, and make suggestions about what they think might be missing or any adjustments that they think should be made and how the model should be better informed by the biology of the species. And finally, reviewers give a Yelp style star review on the model to indicate how well the mapped output of the model matches with their expert opinion. And we're able to use that to inform how we might want to refine the model and also what uses the model could serve. So I'm going to walk through an example of this iterative process of building models and model review. This is an example from a project we did with Fish and Wildlife Service called the One Range Project. So the team created a first version of a model. We sent it through a review, and one of the experts gave it a 3-star review and said, I think this model does fairly well at predicting suitable habitat within a reasonable range for the species, but I would be interested to see what it does in the Huck, which is a watershed unit. To the north, I indicated in the map, it should be added to the extent. So they're saying that they think there could be suitable habitat in an additional area. They indicated where through the tool and said they'd be interested to see how the model predicts in that area. So what our modeling team did is they added this blue area, which is the watershed, to the modeling extent so that we could see what predictions would look like in that area. So here you can see 3 iterations of the model based on this process of model review and revision. So just adding that HUC to the area, the watershed still resulted in a 3-star review. Then we got some additional feedback about the thresholds and how the thresholds for high, medium, and low probability could be adjusted to better match expert understanding. So by model version 3, we were able to get a 5-star review of this model, and which indicates that it does closely match with expert opinion of what's going on the ground in terms of habitat suitability for the species. So these reviews are very helpful because they're one of the key components in determining what the confidence of the model is. So we use a multifaceted approach to identify model confidence based on the integrity of the input data. So how comprehensive are the occurrence records that we have? What methods were employed? We use statistical model validation as most modelers will do, but then we have this additional layer of expert review that really brings this model in front of experts to see what they think and how well it matches expert understanding. So based on those 3 components, each model is assigned model confidence from low, medium to high. And that model confidence corresponds with different applications that would be appropriate for the model. So if you were to do something such as guiding field surveys, potentially you could use a model that doesn't have very high model confidence, like a low to medium confidence model could be very useful if you're guiding field surveys. But if you're doing something that requires very high precision, such as species translocations or an environmental review process, you really do want to have a high confidence model. So we use this framework to indicate to people, based on how the model reviewed and how the model performs, what the best uses of this model are in terms of applications. All of this information is summarized in a format that people can digest, even if you're not a statistician or modeler. So we have information about the taxa that was modeled, a description of what approaches were used, that indication of model confidence with a summary of the environmental predictors that were most important for the model. And there's also a summary of how the model reviewer comments. So what did experts actually say about what this model was showing and how well that matched their understanding of the species on the ground. So bringing this all into the context of our project with DoD, the Legacy Natural Resource Management Program, we've been in a 3-year agreement with the Legacy program. And in the first 2 years, we worked with the NatureServe Natural Heritage Program to get permission to use this information, all of the occurrence records, to create and deliver models to DoD that could be used for management. In the first 2 years of the project, we created habitat models for 28 different species across different taxonomic groups and coordinated reviews with experts within the NatureServe network and also DoD and some other partners like Fish and Wildlife Service to take a look at those models from years 1 and 2. We're currently getting towards the end of the last year of the agreement. So this project is wrapping up this September. So we've created over 20 models for year 3. 19 of those are already ready for review, and we are in the process of coordinating expert review of many of these species. The next step for us is to wrap up those expert reviews, make sure that we revise the year 3 models and deliver them to DoD. So in years 1 and 2, I wanted to show the species that we created models for. So in the first year, we focused on 7 herps, which you'll see in the first 7. And then in year 2, expanded that out to a number of different taxonomic groups, including plants and many other vertebrates and inverts as well. I'm going to leave that up for a second just so people know what's available. And I can also distribute these slides to the organizers if you'd like to look at the species list after the call. So these species from years 1 and 2, in year 1 especially, are available on NatureServe Explorer Pro. So DoD has an agreement with Explorer Pro at the moment, where if you are a DoD employee and you have just an email address with that indicator, then you are able to get access to these models on Explorer Pro, and you're able to view them through this mapping tool and pull up these habitat probability maps. So the color scheme on this is a bit different from our review tool. The dark green is high habitat probability, the medium green is medium probability, and then the lighter green is low probability. So you can view models through this, and we also have a portal where if you'd like to use the models in more of a spatial analysis capacity, like in ArcGIS Pro, you can actually pull those into ArcGIS Pro and do some spatial analyses with them. So those are for year 1 and 2 models. And then for year 3, I also wanted to show which species are being modeled and which are already ready for review. So there are a number where we already have reviews, but if those are ones that are of interest to you that you'd like to weigh in on, this is definitely a great opportunity for you to give us feedback so that we can make sure that those models are as useful as possible and really represent your understanding of each of these species. We also took on some more difficult to model species this year. So we have some in progress, for example, for the monarch and some of these very wide-ranging bat species as well. So I wanted to show this because I am hoping some of you might be experts in some of these species. And if you are interested in taking a look at the draft models we have and giving review, we can do a follow-up just training on how to use the review tool, which is pretty quick. And then you can give us the feedback in like a standardized format, and we'll be able to use those for revision of any of these species models before September. I'm gonna go to some applications once we have these models in hand. So what do we use these models for? Generating these refined habitat maps that are much more precise than something like a range map that is based on counties can really help when you're trying to undertake activities that could have an impact on the species. So in this example, the purple areas you see are a planned road construction project. And when you just look at the range map, it looks like there's quite a bit of conflict between where road construction is going to occur and suitable habitat for the species. But when you're able to have a habitat model and you're looking at, okay, where are areas that are actually high quality habitat where we expect to really see the species in red on the right, there's actually much less conflict between this construction project and where the species is most likely to occur. We've also used these models to guide field surveys. This was a project where we worked with the Bureau of Land Management. So you can see a version 1 model in the green shading on the map. And then those black points are locations where additional field surveys were conducted after this model was created. And as a result of having this model output, BLM was actually able to identify in the stars new populations of this plant, of this flowering plant species, and that was guided by this habitat model. And then there's an iterative loop here where now that there were new occurrence records, we were actually able to revise the model to improve the model outputs. So here you see a revised model, which much more tightly matches all of those occurrence records, including the new information that was gathered in the field. And then this is showing just another application looking at, in dark green, the protected areas based on gap status 1 and 2. So you can see how much of that that suitable habitat is actually in a protected area and how much is outside of a protected area. Another application is understanding the broader context of the species that you're managing and its the rest of its range and who's managing it. So we often will take a species habitat model to identify partners in conservation. In this case, we have a G1 critically imperiled plant. And if we look at the DoD portion of this top donut graph is the light green. So that's the portion of that high probability habitat that is managed by DoD. And then you can see the other management agencies that are also responsible. So for example, Fish and Wildlife in the darker green has about an equivalent responsibility for managing. So in this way, if you are managing something, you're able to see how responsible are you for it based on the area of habitat that's on your lands, and what other agencies might you want to work with to make sure that the impact on the species is low. The bottom donut in the green and yellow shows the protection status. So what portion of the species range or of the species good quality habitat is in a protected area versus not. We're also able, once we continue to advance and expand the library of models that we have for different species, we're able to scale up and make multi-species products. So the first attempt to do this, which was very successful with a massive modeling effort, was the map of biodiversity importance. So this shows bringing together these wall-to-wall species habitat models to get a wall-to-wall estimate across CONUS of species richness of imperiled species. So this obviously has a lot of uses just for identifying areas that are really important to many species. The scale here shows the count of species, so how many imperiled species occur in that area. And again, this is all based on species habitat models. And having the models as opposed to just occurrence records allows you to get that wall-to-wall coverage across CONUS. So you don't have these big gaps based on just inability to do field surveys everywhere. And if you're a specific land manager, you can then look at where your land falls in relation to something like the map of biodiversity importance. For example, this shows how some of the DoD installations overlap with these areas and which ones might have many species that are imperiled versus fewer species that are imperiled. In the first couple years of the project, Geo here was able to bring together a lot of this multi-species information for DoD. He created an interactive application where you can actually explore each DoD installation and see what species occur there based on both occurrence records and species habitat models. And look at a multi-species perspective and understand what the responsibility of that particular installation is for the species. I'll show a quick animation here of using this tool, the DoD TRS Explorer, and you can see Geo's email at the bottom of the slide for how to get access to this. So this has the DoD installations mapped. You can, in an interactive mapping way, click on an installation and it shows you a few different summaries of information of imperiled species at that location. So you can look at a taxonomic breakdown, a breakdown based on ESA status, and then also this estimate of how responsible the DoD is for each species based on how much of the habitat falls on DoD installations. It also links to NatureServe Explorer if you're interested in getting information about any individual species. So this again is a tool that is available to anyone at DoD, and if you would like to get access to it to check it out, please reach out to Geo. Another extension of having these habitat models is that we can start to do things like better understand which species, where they occur, and what they might be vulnerable to. So we worked with the DoD Climate Action Team in the last year to estimate how many threatened, endangered, and at-risk species are vulnerable to different climate hazards. This just shows one example map of the number of species indicated by the shade of the color. So darker colors indicate more species, whereas white means fewer species. How many species on each installation are vulnerable to wildfire. And we've done this for many of the climate hazards that are in the DoD climate assessment tool. And the last thing is just opportunities to engage after this webinar. So I would love for anyone who would like to see those draft models and play a role in making sure that they're revised and that they're really reflecting expert knowledge to please reach out to me. You can also reach out to data science at NatureServe to get into that reviewer sign-up tool and see which species are available for review. I can give you access to NatureServe Explorer Pro, where you can look at those already published models from year 1, and we'll soon be adding the ones from year 2 there as well. And then also just reach out with any additional questions or thoughts. And we have a good amount of time for discussion, so I'd love to know what your questions are and how we can best apply this or get this information to whomever it might be useful to. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Max. Susie, I see that you're asking for Geo's address. I will get it in the chat just really quick. Oh, thank you for doing that. So there is a question. Philip asks, are there individual species models assessed at different spatial scales, or are the spatial scales of underlying predators fixed? I'm sorry about that, Phil.
Maybe Phil, you can clarify. Are you asking what spatial resolution the habitat models are completed at?
Yeah, I just wanted to know, for example, if the spatial scale of the underlying predictors were fixed across all species that you've conducted models or for example, if arroyo toads, you're evaluating the spatial scale of the predictors differently than for other species.
Yep. So we have a standard library of environmental predictors that we've compiled. They all go down to the 30-meter scale resolution. So that's kind of the highest resolution we can do is 30 meters, just based on the environmental predictor library. So whenever it's appropriate and we can, we always will run these models or make the predictions across the 30-meter scale resolution. The only exception can be for wide-ranging species. For example, for the bats, we're going to be modeling at 330-meter resolution. The 30-meter scale for them doesn't make a whole lot of biological sense based on their movement. And then also in terms of just computing time, given how wide-ranging they are, that's a limitation. So for some of those very wide-ranging species, we'll go up to the 330-meter resolution.
Jessica asks, are there plans for expanding this tool for species in Alaska and Hawaii? And then Asia asks, and expanding into the Western Pacific.
Yeah, so currently our limitation for the modeling, this modeling workflow is the environmental input data. So the same data sets are currently not available in Alaska and Hawaii, and that's really our biggest limitation there. And then the other limitation we have at the moment is the NatureServe network program in Hawaii is not active, so we don't have as comprehensive occurrence records for Hawaii. We do have an active program in Alaska, but again, the limitation there is really the environmental predictors. It is something that there's definitely an interest in and need for. We don't have any imminent plans on how to solve that problem yet.
Yeah, just thanks. Sorry, thanks, Max. If I can just say a few more words on this. That the tools that we've developed in the workflow is absolutely transferable. and there certainly is desire to cover certainly the United States more comprehensively, including Alaska, Hawaii, and other overseas territories. However, there are a few limitations about the NatureServe network. First of all, in thinking about islands where we do not track marine species very closely at all. So you might find some gaps there, especially for DoD installations close to the ocean. But certainly, as Max was saying, the environmental predictors are the main limitation there in terms of having a uniform environmental predictor library that covers all those territories. We certainly could think about doing sort of case-specific projects that actually involve completely different environmental predictor libraries that would have to be developed from scratch or obtained from some existing sources. And so I think it's something we could certainly work on, but we're not ready to go specifically for the environmental predictors. All the other tools are absolutely transferable and could be applied to it. So just wanted to clarify.
Chris Peterson asked, do the models use or could they use in the future citizen scientist platforms such as Herper, Mapper, iNaturalist, eBirds to get better over time?
Yeah, that's definitely on the table and something we plan to do for a number of species. I think this is going to become especially relevant when we're talking about more wide-ranging species that are maybe less imperiled or less closely tracked by the NatureServe network. And there's been a lot of interest in that. So yeah, that's definitely on the table. Gio, I don't know. Gio is an expert in utilizing iNaturalist and other citizen science platforms. So maybe I'll let him weigh in too.
Yeah, thanks, Max. I just wanted to clarify that we do use those data in some cases, just not by default, not always. We have a relationship with Herp Mapper and have access to unobscured data for at-risk species of herps. The same kind of relationship is more difficult with iNaturalist, but we've had long-term discussions with iNaturalist and collaborate in various ways. Certainly for wider ranging species, as Max was saying, especially where the NatureServe network data aren't quite as comprehensive, we absolutely have to make use of those data sources and try to do as much as we can. So for more common and widespread species for which we still require models, we absolutely consider those data sources. And we could do another webinar on thinking about how to filter and vet those data and mobilize them in a way that actually makes sense. But so I'm happy to talk about that some other time, but certainly they need a lot of oversight.
I update you.
Ken, Wilmer, if you want to come off of mute and ask your question, you're more than welcome to.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. I am Kent Wimmer. I'm the coordinator of the Northwest Florida Sentinel Landscape. And several years, the Air Force partnered with the University of Florida's GeoPlan Center to model priority areas for the overlap Air Force training and focal species area habitat that they'd like to see conserved. And we actually include that data on this web map application that I have for the Northwest Florida Sentinel Landscape. And I was wondering if you folks had coordinated with the Air Force or the University of Florida GeoPlan Center with this data, because they have several of the same data sets, you know, eastern diamondback snake, or I mean, sorry, not eastern, but the flatwood salamander reticulated and the frosted eastern diamondback. I was just curious whether you folks are talking on the
We've definitely coordinated with a number of folks around, especially the Eastern Diamondback, because there's a working group within the Fish and Wildlife Service, the core species assessment team, that compiled data from a number of these sources and helped us to identify data gaps that we had. So we've reached out to all of those sources. As to the others, I don't know, Gio, if you want to comment on any of the other coordination for those species.
No, I think this is where we sort of welcome this kind of dialogue, because oftentimes we find that the identification of species targets for us to model is always relevant. I mean, we always focus on at-risk species of relevance to DoD, but perhaps sometimes miss out on very timely and pressing questions that we could help answer. So I would basically welcome your input on future targets, and I think we could coordinate more closely to make sure that we fulfill some of your needs. So we can certainly pay closer attention to some of the species you mentioned, and I'm not sure off the top of my head here, unless Ratika has some thoughts. But I take this as an invitation to collaborate more closely to actually provide you the models you need at the time you need them. Thank you for bringing that up.
You're welcome. I am not the modeler. I can build a web map, and I just put a link. I just put a link into it. But I am happy to introduce you folks to the folks that are actually doing this work. We're trying to use this data as we're identifying areas we'd like to see conserved within the Northwest Florida Sentinel landscape. So thank you.
We can talk about this more, Dial.
Thank you.
We can talk about this more if needed.
Whoever is talking on another call, can you please mute yourself? Phil asked, do DoD employees have permission to make data available to DoD contractors via portals you have alluded to?
Yeah, we take that on a case-by-case basis, but basically for these models, Legacy has funded the creation of them. So if it's a contractor that is basically fulfilling the same objectives and is working under DoD, then we have been able to share the model outputs for those purposes. Yeah, so it's case by case, but I've been able to set that up before.
Asia, I don't know if your question has been answered, so I'm going to ask it again. Has the tools been used for analyzing cumulative conservation efforts or developed with areas adjacent to DoD properties? I'm sorry if I messed your question up.
Maybe you could clarify the question. If part of it is whether the models are developed kind of outside of DoD footprints, the answer is definitely yes. So for our modeling, with some exceptions, just based on like what a partner asks us to do, but in the case of DoD, all of our models are range wide. So we're modeling the entire range wide distribution that's within CONUS. And so that includes areas that overlap with DoD installations as well as areas off of installation. And that is really powerful for allowing DoD and others to understand like what their relative responsibility is for habitat for the species. So yes, all of these models are range wide. And if there were other parts of that question, let me know.
Asia, thanks for getting to my question. I was also curious to see how the analysis tool might have been used to analyze impacts of projects over time, whether currently ongoing or planned, referring more to impact analysis. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. So let's see, it's kind of a question of the timing of like what time period the model is representing. So we're using occurrence records that are not just for 1 year. Generally, we need to use occurrence records across multiple years to get enough coverage to do a high performing model. So in terms of impact, you would probably want to be looking at how the locations of the occurrences have changed over time, and you need enough of a data set to have a model of habitat that was used or suitable prior to some action and then after some action. So I would say we have not tackled that yet. The only thing we've really been talking about so far is like projecting suitable habitat based on climate change models. So like projecting based on climate would work, but certainly you'd be able to tell if a habitat is predicted to be suitable and has been impacted by an action. And again, Gio, I don't know if you want to weigh in differently on that, but yeah, these models generally represent occurrence records across multiple years. And then they're also anchored in the most up-to-date environmental predictors we can have. So we want to be refreshing that environmental library as often as possible, because we're really making these predictions based on the environmental data as well. And that is obviously collected at a certain period in time.
Yeah, I think you did a really good job getting at the difference between modeling the habitat and modeling the occurrence of species. I would say what we're doing here is modeling the distribution of the habitat, whether it's habitat that actually has occurrences of the species or not, but is potential habitat where the species could occur. And so they probably aren't the best tools to track and monitor changes in occurrence over time, like expansions or recoveries, because we're not tightly modeling the occurrence of a species. We're modeling the occurrence of its habitat, and so not necessarily population size and things like that. So I think I think we can certainly work towards that, but we're not, these tools aren't ready-made for a tool to track recovery actions, unfortunately. What I was going to say though, and that gets to your question a little bit, is we are definitely looking at opportunities for partnering opportunities for partners in conservation by sort of analyzing who manages the habitat of what species, and areas where sort of clusters of responsibility, if you will, and clusters of different managing agencies are aggregate to potentially signal a good partnering opportunities between agencies as well. So that's something we started doing and are interested in working with the DoD Legacy more about. So please voice your support as well if you'd like to find out about those kinds of things.
If anyone has any additional questions, please come forward, take yourselves off of mute, and you can certainly ask more questions. We have about 10 more minutes left for this presentation, so please don't hesitate to ask all your questions. Or if you don't get a chance to, you can certainly email Gio and Max or NatureServe to have your questions answered after the meeting is completed.
Hi, yes, I had a quick question. Can you hear me? Okay. I may have missed this because I came in a little bit late, but I was wondering what aspects of everything that you just talked about relates or correlates with the DoD/Army's Construction Engineering and Resource Laboratory is doing to transition the NatureServe kind of climate change vulnerability index into a web-based application for DoD installation managers. Is that what you just showed, or is there something else that's a different avenue?
So the folks we've worked at so far are DoD legacy for the species habitat modeling, and then they also put us in touch with the DoD climate action team. So we've been working with the climate action team for the more climate vulnerability application of this to get that on the DoD climate assessment tool. So those are the avenues that we've gone through so far.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, there are links. There are certainly connections between what we've worked on with the legacy program and the potential new work here. Including what Max showed about the vulnerability to climate hazards, the data that's being integrated within the DoD climate assessment tool, and I would say these models would not directly inform the new work on the online CCVI, but essentially what we're talking about is more spatially explicit assessments of climate change effects on species. And certainly the types of methods that we've been working on with the models are the same kinds of methods. So we're likely to be doing a lot of internal, knowledge transfer with respect to the methods, certainly. But it's unclear to me. I don't think that the models themselves will actually be used for the work you talked about.
Okay, thank you very much.
Asia, you can come off of your mute.
Thanks, Max. I had a question about the how far back the data sets go. I understand from the time moving forward for present day and then moving into conservation, but I'm curious if you've received requests from the client or just internally going through sort of the QC of the QA/QC part of the tool and its application regarding baseline shift and in conservation. And so whether you're being able to track, again, going somewhat related to, this was the status of the species before, this is, we're tracking how it looked before, this is how it looks now, and this is how it could look in the future, whether it's been a negative trend or a positive trend because of current or previous conservation efforts. Thank you.
Yep. Yeah, thanks for that question. The focus of what we're doing right now is to really have the most up-to-date habitat distribution information available. So we've been focused on as close to present as possible. And then in terms of expanding out, instead of expanding kind of through time, looking back in time, we've been focused more on getting current estimates for more species. So we're mostly focusing on expanding the species list. So we do have a filtering process for vetting the data to get this information as current as possible. The exact time cutoff for which data will be used does a bit depend on which species and how data deficient the species might be. So if we have a lot of data available that was very current, we'll use that. And if there's only a few element occurrences because it's a very small ranging species that hasn't been surveyed in a while, we might allow some records that are a bit older to be used. So yeah, as I said, we're really focused on getting as close to the current habitat distribution as possible, and hoping to do a refresh as often as possible. So as new occurrence information comes in, what we are putting on Explorer Pro is the current state of things. In terms of looking at change over time, the probably most likely next step for us is going to be looking at into the future, like I said, based on climate change projections, and using the existing model to look at how are the climate or how are the environmental predictors likely to change over time, and therefore what is the expected habitat distribution going to look like in the future. So that's the most likely next step. We have not used this yet to look at kind of into the past to compare past to present based on actions.
Yeah, it's a very good question. It's that we don't have high quality historical data to enable us to really get at trends over time. I mean, the main issue there, as I'm sure you're aware, is we do not really have comprehensive data on the absence of species. So we have a little bit of occurrence data, but we don't really know how comprehensive that was. So it could be that any change we see is actually a sampling artifact of just how many occurrences we had in the past. One thing I was going to mention is beyond the context of our work with modeling and NatureServe, we do some work looking at historical trends when it's relevant to the ranking of species. So during our ranking work, we actually might look at trends over time in the occurrence of species to designate a species as critically imperiled, for example, and sometimes to get at things like white nose syndrome or whatever, where species are widespread but actually declining rapidly. And so that's where you might find some of that information, sometimes by navigating the NatureServe Explorer website for a given species. If you look under the criteria that went into ranking a species, sometimes you might find things in terms of trends as well. That might be helpful. We haven't been able to look at it so closely because of the lack of high quality data, I would say.
I think we have one more time for a quick question. James, if you want to pop off a mute and ask it, I think we'll end with your question.
Okay, it's just a basic question. I'm in Pacific Island Fish and Wildlife Office as the DoD liaison. I had a question on DoD mission priority species, and sorry, it's not related to the modeling, but is there a list that folks are working off for those DoD mission priority species? And is that available? Over.
So I can answer from both the NatureServe side, and then I know that we received a list from DoD that maybe Gio can elaborate on the origins of that. So in the first year of the project, NatureServe did an assessment framework to identify threatened, endangered, and at-risk species that probably based on their occurrence or expected occurrence on DoD installations should be considered as part of this. So this assessment framework basically looked at how imperiled the species was, how much occurrence it had or was expected to have on DoD installations based on either occurrence records or habitat distribution, and a few other criteria that we worked with the legacy program to identify. And from that process came up with a list of 1,002 what we call potential TERS species. So when we prioritize things for modeling, or when you look at that DoD TERS Explorer application that Gio put together, the 1,002 species are what the kind of the realm of species that we're working with. And that completely includes a list that we separately received from DoD that the installations maintain based on their understanding of what's present and what should be tracked. So I think one of the benefits we found with the assessment framework from NatureServe is that it's more taxonomically comprehensive. So it includes plants and invertebrates that might not have been on the radar for DoD previously. And we have confronted that with the what DoD considers to be of importance already. The same thing happened for the climate assessment tool, where again, we assessed that list of 1,002 that is more comprehensive. And then DoD, I think, had a list of closer to maybe 300 species that we confronted that with. And again, our list is fully inclusive, and it just includes some other taxonomic groups and things that maybe weren't on the radar previously. And Gio, I'm not sure what the origins of that list of around 300 that came from DoD was originally.
Yeah, we worked with BAH, who maintains this list. I think from a variety of sources. It's essentially a list of species by installation. Comes from a variety of sources. I was going to say our list is fully inclusive, bar about 1% of the species that either are, as I was saying, marine or pelagic for the most part, which we do not track closely around the NatureServe network or model. So we just did not have information on those, as well as a few taxonomic differences where we just could not quite identify exactly the same subspecies or the same taxonomic identification. But that 1%, the lists are fully inclusive. So yeah, there's an internal list that's being maintained by BAH, and we coordinate it with them. And that information is available in a few spots, as Max showed, as well as in the DoD climate assessment tool. Those species lists will be available to look at climate vulnerability of those species.
Thank you.
All right. Well, I think we'll end today's DoD webinar here. Max, thank you. Gio, thank you. Thank you to NatureServe for agreeing to do this webinar, and to everybody who came and stayed for the whole meeting. Thank you so much. And with that, have a great afternoon.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks for having us. Thank you.